Welcome to Soundtrack Your Life, a podcast about soundtracks, music, and movies. Each episode features a guest and focuses on a specific soundtrack and the personal stories connected to it. Now here's your host, Ryan Pack.
Hey, it's Ryan. Thanks for listening to Soundtrack Your Life, the podcast where we talk about soundtracks and the personal connections that we have to them. Today we're going to talk about the 1994 Michael Lehmann film Airheads. We have a returning guest today. He is the guitarist of the Guilty Hearts. Welcome back to the show, Edgar Rodriguez.
Dude, what's up, Ryan? It's good to be back.
So, Edgar, why did you want to talk about Airheads today?
This movie, I think, was not on my radar when it came out. I think it was one of those finds where I went to the video store looking for something to rent, and I looked at the cover of this and I was like, Steve Buscemi, Adam Sandler, Brendan Fraser, rock and roll. Okay, I'm going to take this home and check it out. And you pop it in and like right away, you know, you hit gold, because the greatest rock and roll band of all time is opening the movie. Is Motorhead, you know. So it's like you can't go wrong if the movie's opening with a Motorhead track. You just can't. So from there, I think for me, what I really love about this movie, I mean, besides the story, which is really cool, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. The cast is amazing, but for me, it's a time capsule. You know, I lived in Los Angeles while this was happening, but to me, it's almost like the movie came out in '94, but really it was almost like set in like '91, right? So it was like the heyday of the Sunset Strip had faded, but you still had like tons of people moving to Los Angeles with that dream of like, I'm gonna be a rock star and I'm gonna do whatever it takes. And so it's like faded glory of the Sunset Strip. You've still got these hangers on, like they still kind of want to do that rock and roll thing. Music around them is changing. They don't really fit in. The radio station that is featured in the movies, you know, they call it Rebel Radio. Of course, we had pirate radio in Los Angeles back then, which is very popular. I imagine that was partially the inspiration. There's a portion of the movie where, you know, there's this subplot where the station is going to be changing formats. That actually happened to KMET 94.7 that most people in Los Angeles would know as the Wave. So KMET was very much like KLOS. They were competing AOR rock stations in Los Angeles. And, you know, it's like if one station wasn't playing something good, you could flip over to the other one and you'd have, you know, some good rock and roll to listen to. And, you know, somewhere, I think it was like 86, maybe a little sooner, maybe like 85, all of a sudden KMET disappears and here's the Wave, and John Tesh is now king of the airwaves. So, I mean, for me, in a lot of ways, it captured that period of like, you know, it was right before like rap rock really happened. You know, it was an interesting time in Los Angeles because you had it like even in the underground, it was like this very like it was like the Chili Peppers had planted seeds, and there were all these kind of like funk rock bands that were happening, right? It's like a little bit of Jane's Addiction, a little bit of Red Hot Chili Peppers. All of a sudden you've got, you know, bands that are doing like slap bass and, you know, white dudes with dreadlocks and you know, I think the LA Weekly called them dirt heads at the time. But it was like, you know, this like hippie, it's like the moshing hippie of Los Angeles. It was like really into funk rock. So to me, it's like, it's that exact period where like the, you know, the glow, the glitz, the glamour of the Sunset Strip is like starting to, it's faded, and like there's still people holding on to the dream, but like music is like moving forward, and it's a missed opportunity, right? And it's I think, you know, you and I were talking a little bit about this, about, you know, how the movie really is about class struggle. It's about people that just don't have anything to lose, and they're just trying to move up, right? They're trying to get, you know, they've been working hard for their idea of glory, and, you know, here they are, you know, what are they going to do about it? And it's, you know, in a lot of ways, I think it was much more than I ever expected, you know, picking it off the rack at Blockbuster.
So I think it was last week or earlier this week, this discussion on Twitter came up about what movie has a low-key cast, what movie is low-key about being about class struggle. So, you know, obviously we're not talking about like Parasite, which is very literally about a class struggle.
Right.
And a bunch of people went to bat for Airheads.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is I've seen lots of articles that basically say that Airheads is a remake of Dog Day Afternoon.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I thought that was really interesting when you brought that up about class struggle, because, you know, what's Dog Day Afternoon about? It's about, you know, that class struggle, about not having enough and just kind of saying, screw it, I'm going to go rob a bank. And that's pretty much what happens with these guys. You know, they think that all they really need is just that their music is so good that all they need is that they want their demo heard. Like, that's it. That's all they want. You know, but how they get there is quite the journey.
But I think it's also important to note that once they get there, they're basically like in this bureaucratic nightmare.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of those things, I think, that, you know, we all have this idea that radio stations are fun and it's all about the music, and like, you know, a programming director is gonna that's somebody that's just so passionate about music that they're gonna go hand select these records and bring them into the station. It's not about that at all. You know, it's as much a business as anything else. I remember, I won't name the K-Rock DJ because I think he's still on the air somewhere. I don't want to get sued for slander either, but I remember having a conversation with said K-Rock DJ at the Whiskey A Go-Go, and he was there. I don't even remember why he was there, but, you know, I was like, hey, what's happening to, like, you know, the music on K-Rock? You know, you're playing more and more like, you know, this very popular corporate rock. Like, what's going on? Like, you know, what happened? Like, this music sucks. And he's like, he got really pissed and he got really defensive, and he's like, do you think that millions of dollars of market research is gonna, you know, do you think you're gonna know more than millions of dollars of market research? He's like, I think not. I'm like, well, I know what I like, and I vote with my wallet and I vote with my feet, you know. And I think that was really eye-opening. And then I got to intern a little bit at that radio station for a hot minute, and it was very much like, you know, it was like Office Space, man. It was like TPS reports talking about, like, you know, oh, the new live single is up, you know, 3 points, but it's still getting killed by crash test dummies. And it's like, nobody needed to hear that. And chances are, if we were all organically discovering music, you probably wouldn't have ended up there. I don't know. But that's just my 2 cents. I've been called a music snob before, so I don't know.
I feel like this podcast is just for music snobs.
Oh, for sure.
So the movie was a colossal failure.
Yeah, from a money-making standpoint, I think it did like nothing. And I think even if you look on like IMDb, I think it's got like a 6 out of 10 or something like that. I think, I don't know if it was, I mean, just the casting decision of like Steve Buscemi, Adam Sandler, and Brendan Fraser. It's like, how do you get there? You know, Steve Buscemi, like fresh off of, you know, things like Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, and, you know.
Yeah, I don't think he had done Pulp Fiction yet, but he had done like Reservoir Dogs and a bunch of Coen Brothers films.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, Michael McKean, Joe Mantegna, Judd Nelson, Chris Farley, like Ernie Hudson, Michael Richards, like
Harold Ramis.
Harold Ramis, David Arquette in one of my favorite roles in that movie, which is like the total party surfer bro. It's wild. It was very pop culture. Like I said, it's like it's a time capsule. I mean, there's a scene in the movie where they're taking calls and, you know, Beavis and Butthead call in.
That's true.
I saw you at the wagon wheel and your band sucked. Yeah.
I feel like it's a movie that has a bit of an identity crisis.
How so?
Like, you can tell that they were aiming for this to be like a big blockbuster comedy in the summer.
Yeah, like it feels like they wanted to be like Wayne's World or, you know, something like that.
But I feel like it would. This is kind of a hot take, but I feel like it is spiritually closer to like High Fidelity.
Yeah, I definitely I could see that. I don't know. I mean, overall, for me, it was just a fun movie. You know, it was the songs in it. I mean, it's like you got Richard Hell and Thurston Moore doing some songs. You got some bizarro cover of Four Non Blondes, like doing Van Halen.
Anthrax doing the Smiths,
which is probably my favorite version of London. I think that's the only way I can handle the Smiths much these days, especially. I won't get started on Morrissey, but, you know, considering a lot of Morrissey's views of the world, you know, it's just like a lot of the club scenes were really accurate to, because White Zombie in one of the club scenes.
At the bar.
Yeah. Which, yeah, there were people I knew in the, like as extras in that scene that I knew from just going to clubs and going to shows. So, you know, like I said, it just felt really like an accurate portrayal of Los Angeles at the time.
It's really a movie for music lovers. Like, you need to understand those references. You need to understand that it's actually pretty accurate when it comes to a lot of these things.
Yep.
You know, obviously this whole, you know, stage diving into the crowd at the radio station afterwards, probably a little too big of a moment for, you know, a smaller movie like High Fidelity. But, you know, like, it's a movie about music nerds for music nerds in a way.
Mm-hmm. It's about, you know, it's like there's that one scene in the movie where Brendan Fraser's character gets like his cover gets blown, right? His cool gets blown by a cop, and, you know, I think that diving into the crowd, I mean, that's the dream, right? At that time, I think in the like rock and roll consciousness, I think that was the dream. It's like the Eddie Vedder, you know, jumping into the crowd, you know, Adore Me, you know, never quite as cool as like a Chris Cornell Christ pose, but, you know, I think it's all related. You know, it was a reflection of the time.
Thinking back on different soundtracks, there's not a lot of soundtracks that are predominantly hard rock for like a major studio picture.
No, because I mean, even in the 80s, when you had, like, you know, when like hard rock was all the rage, even things like Bill and Ted's, or I don't know if you remember, there was this there's a horrible Freaky Friday type movie with Kirk Cameron and Alan Thicke. No, it's called like Father Like Son. Yeah, it was terrible. And I think it was Alan Thicke. I'm sorry, Alan Thicke, if I'm associating you with this movie and it wasn't you. But yeah, I mean, it was always like stuff and like somebody somewhere said, hey, like don't use this this really cool band, you know, like Degeneration, like they did in Airheads, you know, go ahead and use that Winger song, you know. And it's like, nobody wants to hear the Winger song. Poor choices were made. Like, I think there's always I think in this day and age we get spoiled, you know, by, you know, people like T-Bone Burnett that, you know, has a real knack for picking great tunes for for movies and for shows. I mean, back then it was, who knows? I mean, it was probably like payola. You know, it was like, hey, you know, let's put this Dangerous Toys song on the soundtrack instead of something like Degeneration or.
It's funny that you bring that up. The music for Airheads was chosen by Carter Burwell. Carter Burwell, who's known for doing all the Coen Brothers movies.
What a trip! I did not know that. That's interesting. I'll have to look him up. You know, that's one of those jobs that like when you're like sitting there and you're having a bad day at work and you're like, what would be my dream job? It would be like like music supervisor on like a movie or something like that. But you know, I imagine that it's probably not all roses like you would like to think, where it's like you're going to get like full creative authority over the selection of the songs.
Right, but as far as soundtrack supervisors, he's probably one of a handful that I know by name.
That's really cool. But I don't know that I know any really besides T-Bone.
But Carter Burwell also did Wayne's World 2.
Ah, okay. So then
Velvet Goldmine later.
So that explains how Jamie Got a Gun ended up on Airheads, right? It's that Wayne's World 2 connection.
That's possible. But yeah, I like that the soundtrack is not like too on the nose as far as like hard rock in this period.
No, I mean, you got the Replacements on there.
Not actually on the soundtrack, but in the movie, for sure.
That's right, yeah. I'm surprised that it didn't make it onto the actual soundtrack. I thought it did.
Yeah, that and the David Byrne song did not make it on the soundtrack.
But Stuttering John did.
Yeah, Stuttering John did make it on there. I think the Replacements was probably not hard rock enough for the soundtrack. They wanted to probably keep it kind of consistent.
Yeah. I mean, that song I think was pretty dead on for the movie. It is, you know, very much about not being satisfied with your station in life, and you know, it's cool. I had heard like radio Replacements, you know, probably way before I heard anything like Sorry Ma, Forgot to Take Out the Trash. Like that record, once I heard that record, I mean, that pretty much solidified it for me. Like I love pretty much every era of the Replacements, but for me, like that's just like so wild and unhinged and just trashy and, you know, sloppy, but it's got the spirit, you know, and I think that's it's true folk music.
Yeah, my friend commented that it's not like exactly punk, but it's like old school rock and roll just played twice as fast.
Yeah, man. And that, I mean, for me personally, that's another just of my favorite pockets of music is, you know, it's some of my friends call it punk and roll. Some of my friends just call it rock and roll. But, you know, in the 90s specifically, there were quite a few bands, or, you know, like bands like the Devil Dogs out of New York, and Teen Generate out of Japan, and you know, all these bands, you know, the Mummies in San Francisco, that had this sound that was, you know, it was very rock and roll, but it was like very amped up to the point where it was, you know, people would be like, that's punk rock, but it sounds like a 50s song. And yeah, I mean, to me, that's like you're taking the shake, rattle, and roll of the early days, and, you know, the wildness of Little Richard, and just hitting it with amphetamine and turning it up to 11. And it's, you know, it's a living, breathing monster at that point. It's good times too.
So I read an article maybe a year ago about White Zombie, and when they were starting, that they were kind of like this art noise band in New York. Like, you know, the White Zombie that we know today, or the Rob Zombie that we know today, and the Rob Zombie that started back in, you know, the 80s. They're like very different bands. Like I heard that White Zombie before, you know, they became a huge metal band. They were closer to like Swans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when you're talking about like records like Soul Crusher and Make Them Die Slowly, things like that, definitely much noisier. Um, I don't know. I like the first three records. Astro Creep was cool too, but Last Exorcisto, like that record was I drove like a 1983 Ford Econoline van in the 90s, and that was one of the cassettes that was permanently in there.
And as you said, you have Motorhead. Supposedly it's Motorhead with Ice-T and Whitfield Crane.
I have no idea who Whitfield Crane is. I meant to look him up, but I don't know who that is. You might know who that is.
The lead singer of Ugly Kid Joe.
Oh, that would explain why I don't know who he is.
Song.
I have seen the music video to that. It made no sense to me why either of those guys were on stage with Motorhead. I like Ice-T a lot. I actually, got to see Body Count a couple times. I've seen Ice-T a couple times. I enjoyed it at the time. Yeah, but like I said, it was like you were right on the cusp of that whole thing happening.
Let's talk about the cast a little bit. So, we've talked about Steve Buscemi. It seems like it's not worth bringing up Adam Sandler, but I think at this point in his career, like this is his first like major role in a film, and he's going toe to toe with Steve Buscemi and Brendan Fraser, which they were much more seasoned actors than him at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Billy Madison was the next year, right?
Yeah, so he hadn't even done that yet.
Yeah, so he was still at SNL. Yeah, my favorite line from him in that movie is they're talking about like somebody says something like, "Oh, you could have a recording of Pip, that's the name of his character, farting on a snare drum, and you'd have a hit." And he just says, "I ain't farting on no snare drum," but it's the delivery that just cracks me up.
So one of the other famous jokes from the movie is, the Lemmy versus God joke.
Yeah, yeah. Who would win in a wrestling match, Lemmy or God? Yeah, and you've got Harold Ramis posing as an A&R guy but they think he's a cop, so they're asking him the question, and of course he says Lemmy, and he says, they're like, God, trick question, blank hole. Trick question, Lemmy is God, and that's, I don't know, I feel like that's true. It's true for me, at least.
And so Lemmy makes a cameo in the film as a high school newspaper editor.
Exactly.
But I feel like that's just kind of a metaphor for the movie where, they're making these super musical, like you have to be in the know to understand these jokes. Like they could have gone for the much broader, like Ozzy, right? Because everyone knows who Ozzy Osbourne is.
Right.
But they stuck with Lemmy because that's what these guys would say. That's what, if you like, it's true to who this band is.
Yeah. Well, and I think, again, like I think there's like a certain group of people that are like, okay, Keith Richards, right? It's like Keith Richards outlived Lemmy. It's like, okay, I heard a story. I don't even know if this is true, but somebody said that it was in Lemmy's book, where like he had gone to the doctor, and he was like contemplating like cleaning up his act, and the doctor had gone through all his labs, and he basically said, this combination of diet, booze, cigarettes, and drugs that you've maintained for so long is actually keeping you alive. He's like, I'm actually worried about disturbing the ecosystem of your body. It may be the only thing keeping you alive. So he just kept going. So I mean, yeah, Jack and Cokes and cigarettes, and I've heard rumors of drug use. I've never known that to be true for sure. I did see, I don't know if it was a behind the music or like if it was in the Lemmy movie where he's in his apartment in Hollywood off the Sunset Strip, and he was just making French fries. Like that was going to be dinner before he went out. He was cutting up a couple potatoes and dropping them in oil and making some crisps or some chips, and that he was going to have some chips and a Jack and Coke, and he was off to the rainbow. It was just one of those things about Los Angeles that for a long time, and even now, like for a long time, it's like you knew that if you went to the rainbow, you might run into Lemmy. If you went to Crazy Girls, you might run into Lemmy. And now it's like he's immortalized on the patio at the rainbow. There's that cool Lemmy statue. I try and go visit it at least once a year, usually around his birthday or the date of his passing, which are just a few days apart. But for me, I mean, he's probably like my rock and roll hero. Like that's, if I had to pick one, for me it's Lemmy. It's just like no matter how loud, how fast, how hard they played, he always, we're Motorhead and we play rock and roll. And that's always been super important to me.
Yeah, and I'm glad that he made a cameo in the film. I heard in the bar scene where White Zombie ends up playing, Cannibal Corpse and Metallica turned it down.
I wonder if it was the script or the cast. They're like, Brendan Fraser, Adam Sandler, now we're out. I feel like with
Metallica, it's always about the money.
Yeah, Lars is like, are you going to put this on Napster? Am I going to get paid? And Cannibal Corpse had already done Ace Ventura, right? Or was that around the same time?
I think it was around the same time. I think they probably had to choose between the two.
Yeah. Jim Carrey was probably a little more popular at the time than Adam Sandler.
And that's why I bring him up. Like he holds his own really well in that movie. Like for him to basically be the new guy.
Yeah.
That he does pretty well. And I can also see like a bunch of like movie executives watching the movie and being like, oh, that's how we can use him in like, because I feel like his character Pip is like the template for Billy Madison. I feel like
for sure.
You just turn up the rage later, but kind of like that vulnerable kind of man child.
Mm-hmm. So he goes from Pip to Billy Madison to Happy Gilmore. And then eventually to Little Nicky, which we won't talk about.
So I feel like a couple things doom this film. I think Michael McKean, not because he's a bad actor or he's miscast in this film, but I feel like him being in the movie just like raises the expectations of a rock and roll film because of This Is Spinal Tap.
Yeah, absolutely. And his character is like such the opposite of anything Spinal Tap. He's the weaselly ponytail station guy, that's out to sell him out. But it is like a whole nother level.
Yeah, and he wants to turn the station to an adult contemporary station, right?
That's like I was saying, like KMET and the Wave,
So the Lone Rangers, when they do have their music played, it's actually Reagan Youth.
Yeah, it's a Reagan Youth song, which very punk rock. I think the cover of that record that has Degenerated on it has got like 3 Klan members on the front. Very like the 80s were a weird time, man.
Well, I mean, they are called Reagan Youth, right?
Exactly. And I really love the Reagan Youth version. I don't mind the Lone Rangers version. I think it's got its charm for sure. I do wish that there would have been more of an emphasis. That's another band that I wish would have gotten a little bit more recognition. But with punk especially, you've got so many hidden gems, and I think that's what makes it so collectible.
So Primus is also on the soundtrack,
Oh,
and I mean, this
sorry.
is the heyday of Primus, right? Like the early mid
Yeah,
'90s.
I never got that band, man. That is, I think that's kind of like a. I'd rather listen to oh, what was that? Shamrocks and Shenanigans. It's House of Pain. I'd rather listen to House of Pain all day than Primus. I'll probably catch hell for that. I saw Primus recently, last year, because the guitar player in Primus was in this metal band back in the day called Possessed. And so I went to see Slayer on their second to last show ever at the Forum, and Primus was the opening act. And they played for what seemed like, 40 days and 40 nights. It was probably an hour, but yeah, it, I swear I saw Moses up in the nosebleeds with 2 stone tablets and, trying to lead people out of the Forum. How did Ernie Hudson end up in Airheads? Like, that's a head scratcher for me.
So I wonder how much. So Michael Lehmann, who directed the film,
Mm-hmm.
he actually, I want to talk about the writer and the director of this film because it's kind of funny. So Michael Lehmann directed the film, and Michael Lehmann did Heathers.
Oh, which is awesome.
Yeah, which is awesome. So I feel like that's why he was able to grab all these people. So
He also did some other things, right?
he did Hudson Hawk and Meet the Applegates.
Oh, yeah. Hudson Hawk. That's one of 2 movies that I've walked out of a theater in. The other one was it was like Lou Diamond Phillips, and he was like a cop trying to like get like the Night Stalker, like a Night Stalker type killer. I think it was called The First Power. Yeah, so First Power, Hudson Hawk, 2 movies. If there's ever a trivia question about me, what are the 2 movies that I've walked out of? It's Hudson Hawk and The First Power.
So maybe he lost some of his cultural cash with Hudson Hawk, but he did Heathers, and I feel like this is appropriate for like the guy who did Heathers.
Yeah, I think I saw Meet the Applegates too. I think that was okay.
So he didn't write Airheads; he just directed it. Rich Wilkes is the guy who wrote it, and Airheads was his first film or first credit of anything. So Rich Wilkes, he's a brand new screenwriter on the scene. He writes Airheads, and then he ended up creating the Triple X franchise. The Vin Diesel franchise.
Oh, I was like Triple X. I'm like, where are you going? Like you got into porn? No, Triple. And then I was thinking, no, I was thinking Triple H. Sorry, wrestling. Yeah. I don't know if I ever wasn't like Exhibit in those movies too.
That sounds so correct.
Yeah, he was in Triple X State of the Union.
But I don't think Vin Diesel was in that one.
Oh, maybe he took over for Vin Diesel?
No, Ice Cube took over for Vin Diesel. But it's funny, like this guy did Airheads, and then he did the Jerky Boys movie. And then he ended up creating Triple X.
Yeah, maybe he was like during the filming of the movies having drinks with Stuttering John, and he's like, you should do a Jerky Boys movie. He's like, that sounds like a great idea.
And then after that, I'm going total action flick. Gonna start myself an action franchise.
What's he doing these days?
Probably trying to figure out how to make more of these Vin Diesel movies. Do you see any of the humor of Heathers in Airheads now that I told you that he also directed Heathers?
I don't think it's got like the great one-liners that you had in Heathers. But I can see there's a little bit of the darkness in there. I think it's very like it's very Gen X.
I've also seen people say that it's a really accurate portrayal of the music industry, and I think you touched on that with basically how your firsthand experience with how a radio station actually works.
Yeah. And even like with the Guilty Hearts, I think for a brief period there was like some flirtation with Virgin Records. And somebody that was already on the inside, pulled me aside and said, just be really sure that this is what you want, because it's not really what you expect. And, the thing that you love about making music and playing live and things like that, like a lot of that gets stripped away. And, you see it in Airheads, how like the thing that they wanted was to have their music heard. And I think, from an artist perspective, in a lot of ways, like you see it now, you see people are like, I don't care, I'll give it away for free on Bandcamp. I just want people to listen to it. But I'm sure that for a lot of artists, like there's that hope of like, maybe I'll get discovered, right? There's that story, but in the end, it's like, they become a product. They become, another cog in the machine that they're fighting against, and it's like the Borg in Star Trek. You just get assimilated, and now you're just part of the system, and you see it in a lot of bands that like they'll get a little bit of success, and they decide that they want to play by their own rules, and they want their creative freedoms, and their album gets shelved or they get dropped, and it's a business, and I think that's it's one of those things that I think when you're not living in that world that you lose sight of, that it's like you're doing it out of passion and because it's an art. And I know a lot of people do it because they don't ever want to have to get a real job. And having been on tour, I can tell you it's pretty awesome. It's like you run into other people that from other places in completely different city, and that's not something that happens often, and it's people talk about like, oh, I'm going to go to Berlin, and they're like, oh, I've been to Berlin. I've even introduced people that like Berlin's a perfect example. I had a friend that was going to be visiting Berlin, didn't know anybody there, had decided that she was going to travel by herself, which was pretty ballsy at 19 years old. But, my friend Alice is that kind of person. And and so I said, hey, my friend lives in Berlin. You should hit him up. And they became friends. And eventually that friend in Berlin ended up joining the Guilty Hearts as Gabe Hammond, who became our bass player. But that's how that life works, right? It's like if you're very much about like seat of your pants and like serendipitous events and synchronicities and things just lining up when you least expect it, and being able to live with that feast or famine style, like it can be a life that you can enjoy. I don't know that it would have been the same at that level had we gone with Virgin rather than the small independent label that we went with, which is Voodoo Rhythm out of Switzerland. It's a very different thing. Like we had to sign contracts to even have like NDAs to even have a conversation with the people at Virgin, or like it wasn't even the people at Virgin, it was like the handler for the people at Virgin. Whereas like you work with Reverend Beatman who runs Voodoo Rhythm, and it's a handshake deal. It's like that's how you got a record deal, right? You got your picture taken with Reverend Beatman, and he posted on his website, and okay, all right, the Guilty Hearts got a record deal. Here's the picture with Beatman. And just because it's different, right? It's about the art. You don't become a product. You're doing it because you want to be heard. You've got something to say. I think these guys had something to say in the movie, and at the same time they wanted to get paid big time.
Yeah, and I guess the kind of compromise happy ending for them is they get to do it on their terms, right? They're not going to do the sham of a lip sync performance. They're going to do their time, and you know
Exactly.
they're still going to use this event to launch their career, but they're not going to, you know, they're not going to do it through this, pure PR stunt.
Yeah. I wonder how many people watched that movie and then went, I'm going to go write a book about guerrilla marketing. And it's about these wild stunts that are just going to launch a career.
Yeah, so I'm glad that I'm glad that the happy ending isn't that they played on this roof and somehow got a really good lawyer.
Yeah. Well, they still, I don't want to give a, I doubt anybody's going to go out and see this, but, it's, the whole jail scene is interesting because, again, like you were saying, like it's like a Johnny Cash thing. It's like live from Folsom Prison, and now you've got the Lone Rangers live from prison as well.
Right. And then the radio DJ is now their manager since they didn't save the radio station that's still going to adult contemporary.
Yeah, to blast some Enya.
So in a way, it's pretty realistic.
It's very realistic.
Like they didn't save the radio station. Like I guess they didn't really care, but
yeah, no. If we start to take apart that, right, it's like you go out, you're standing up because you're fighting for something you believe in. But as soon as you get your piece of the pie, you're like, all right, I'm good. We don't need to fight for anybody else. Which is, I think, kind of sad in the current state of the world that we're in now. Yeah. I feel like, so many people just want to get back to brunch, but I digress.
I guess they did care about the DJ, and that's why he becomes the manager.
At the same time, in that business, sometimes people just appoint themselves.
Yeah, that's true. But he did end up siding with them after he found out that he was going to lose his job.
Yeah.
But he does humor them at the beginning of the film. He does sit them down for an interview for a little bit before things get crazy.
Yeah, I think he just, if you think about it from the character's perspective, he's just trying to have a little fun, because I think it's just so ridiculous to him that this is even happening. That whole, like, how can you be the Lone Rangers if there's three of you?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And that logic's completely lost on them, too, which is awesome.
Let's end things on the ransom. What they ask for on the ransom note.
Oh, man. I don't remember all of it. I remember there was a football helmet filled with cottage cheese and naked pictures of B. Arthur.
Those are the two most popular things from the ransom note.
What else is on the ransom note? I don't remember. Oh, yeah, here it is. So, number 1, airplay, underlined twice. Number 2, a football helmet filled with cottage cheese. Number 3, a Zahn walnut base with a graphite neck. And a PRS guitar with a dragon inlay. Number 13, naked pictures of B. Arthur. That's what it is.
But even if you think about those things on the list, like such specific things, like with the guitar, the PRS guitar, like such a specific, like if you wanted to make it for the masses, right, you just say, it's a Fender guitar.
Yep.
He wants a Fender guitar, fancy Strat.
Yeah.
It's Ozzy instead of Lemmy. I feel like
it's not B. Arthur. It's Elvira or somebody. I don't know.
Right. Like I feel like there's these like very specific jokes, these very specific references. I don't know if it was the writer or if it was the director, but they really wanted to make it like really specific to the scene and like what these people would actually want.
I think that's what makes a good cult movie. You know, it's like, it's the fact that it's quotable, it's rewatchable because it's so ridiculous. And it's like, even in the movie, it's like there's a scene where like the cops are outside and they're gathering the demands, and in the background you can see two cops filling a football with cottage cheese, like it actually happened. So I mean, it's got tons of these little Easter eggs just like buried in it, and I don't know. It's a like Heathers, right? So Heathers is very, very quotable. Get out of my bed, you fucking psycho, like that. I mean, it's got great lines. I just enjoy it.
Well, thank you, Edgar, for coming back on the podcast.
Anytime.
The Guilty Hearts are on all major streaming services. Edgar's cooking up some new music of his own.
Yeah.
And check that out. Check out our website. There's we put a playlist up every week with bands that we talk about on each episode. There'll be some Guilty Hearts on that playlist, I'm sure. So thanks again for coming by, Edgar.
Yeah, my pleasure, Ryan.
Thanks for joining us this week on Soundtrack Your Life. Make sure to visit our website, soundtrackyourlife.net, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too.